Assumption 7, New Haven 6. We're going to send it back to the studio for the Charged Up halftime report. Sean, Joe, Jonah, and Chris will take over. Gentlemen, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Craig. Back here in the studio, I'm Sean Malone alongside Joe Brown, Jonah Rosen, and Chris Schnabel. Guys, definitely not a good first half for the Chargers, offensively speaking. And Joe, I'm going to turn to you first. What's been the big problem in this half for the Chargers offense? Why can't they get any points on the board?
Well, one thing we touched about before in the pregame was Ryan Nelson's consistency and his ability to just run down the field in both ways. And he's doing an okay job of that. He's 9 of 13 for 112 yards passing and a touchdown. But he did throw that interception, which kind of cost the Chargers. They were on their way. They could have got a couple of points out of it. But now the Chargers only have 6 going into halftime. Ryan Nelson does also have 38 yards rushing on the ground, so he is still doing what he's supposed to do. But the Chargers are just on defense. Assumption got that first touchdown, and that I think is the main thing that happened. Usually the Chargers score first, and they get that momentum going. Or if they don't, they score quickly and show that, hey, we're here to play, we're here to beat you, and they haven't really shown that today.
Jonah, what about you? What have you been seeing in the first half? Do you agree with Joe's assessment?
I definitely agree with the fact that Ronnie Nelson's doing what he's supposed to do. I mean, 9 for 13, 112 and a touchdown. Obviously the pick, but those are solid numbers. I think the biggest hole in the Chargers' offensive game right now is the fact that the running game is not doing much. Like we talked about, Assumption's defense has given up 170.8 rushing yards a game. This is a great rushing attack, and right now, so far, 42 yards for DeCaro, and Trevor Officer, you got to get him more involved. He has 1 carry for 8 yards. The kind of game he had last week, like we were talking about, he's got to get more carries. Definitely in the second half, they'll try and wear the Assumption defense down with a little bit more running.
Chris, what about you? What's your take from the first half?
Well, they got to the red zone. He throws an interception. That's not really going to help. And they got their extra point blocked. So I think it's just a flow. On third down, they're only at 29%. Actually, both teams are 29% right now. They're 2 for 7. You got to do better. You have to keep it moving on third down. Even though first 2 didn't work, you have to keep it moving. They have 112 passing. They have 88 rushing. So this Assumption team's giving up a lot of yards. They should be getting more yards than this. They're a better team than they're playing right now.
Yeah, the one killer was that Ronnie Nelson interception right on the goal line. And talking to Nelson, he has high expectations for himself. If you look at that pace game, it looks like on paper he had a very good game. But I was talking to him during the second half, while he was taking the half off. And he was telling me, I think I did well, but I could have done so much better than that. There were so many open targets that I missed. And I'm just like, dude, look at the score. You had a good first half. And he's like, yeah, but it could have been better. He is not, I guarantee you right now, he's going into halftime, and he's not happy about that 9 for 13, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, just because of that 1 interception. He expects every pass to be right on the money, and if not every pass is on the money, he's going to be disappointed in himself. But he's not the kind of person who's going to go and hang his head. He's the kind of person that's going to motivate his team, and they're going to step up in the second half offensively, I think. I'm expecting an offensive explosion in the second half. What about you guys? Do you think that the Chargers can turn it around in the second half, or do you think the struggles will continue?
I think, honestly, we're looking at it from the New Haven side, but it's not necessarily New Haven doing poorly. It might be Assumption playing well. Assumption's a 2-2 team, so they're not terrible, and they just beat AIC, who was projected to be in the tops of the NE10 conference at the end of the season. They beat them last week, so they showed that they can handle themselves in big games. And their quarterback, Bobby Jordan, he's pretty much same numbers as Ryan Nelson, and he hasn't made any mistakes. What's different, we talked about in the pregame with the rushing, Matt Harivo has 12 attempts for 95 yards, and he had that 53-yard rush out there. So Assumption's just keeping up with the Chargers. And to answer your question, Sean, I think we have all seen in our college time here at UNH that the Chargers have been able to come back from any kind of deficit, and it's only 1 point, and they've come back from much worse, including this season. So they can definitely come back in the second half. Just get it down together, and
Yeah, you mentioned the comebacks. Do you remember the 2011 season where it seemed like every single game went exactly the same for the Chargers? The first half, they weren't doing great. The offense was slow. They were getting beat up on. In the second half, immaculate comeback.
Right, exactly. And it always start with something going well for them going into halftime, and we saw that. Assumption was on the way to scoring, getting more points, making a bigger lead, and New Haven stopped them on fourth down, called the timeout when they were going to kick it, got into Assumption's head. They're like, maybe we shouldn't kick it. Went for it on 4th and 12 instead. Did not get the conversion. New Haven took over. Didn't let them get the points. And then now it's still only a 1-point deficit.
Give credit to Anthony Mortali. The first block of the game that came earlier, I think that was definitely in the head of the Assumption coaching staff, and they were really worried about whether or not a second one was going to be blocked because the Chargers have a bit of a history of blocking field goal attempts. Chris and Jonah, what about you? What expectations do you have from the second half and maybe some adjustments that the Chargers may make?
I mean, obviously, this is an explosive Chargers offense. They're just ridiculous. They score a ton of points every game, and I just don't think this is repeatable in the second half to have only 6 points. I mean, a big thing, obviously, is the third downs like Chris is talking about. 1 for 6 for New Haven, 1 for 2 on 4th. You miss. I mean, it just seems like one of those games where everything's going wrong. 7 for 50 penalties. I don't think that's repeatable. Chargers don't make that many mistakes in games usually. So cut down on the penalties and get better on third down, and I think they'll be solid.
Yeah, I would love to hear what Coach Rossmondo is saying to all those players that commit penalties at halftime right now, because he's a coach that's very big on discipline. You know, he's very stern, very strict. He's one of those coaches that's strict, but you gain respect from him for that. And I know he's going to crack down really hard on those penalties. He's very against penalties being called against his team. He's as any coach would be, he's never happy about that. So I think that's going to turn around in the second half. Chris, what about you? Offensively, what adjustments do you think the Chargers need to make at halftime?
Well, as a team, it's just the Assumption. If you're listening or following on paper, Assumption and New Haven, they're playing very well. The only difference between the two is New Haven's making more mistakes. They have more turnovers than Assumption. 7 penalties for 50 yards to 2 penalties for 25 yards. If you actually look at the stats, the Chargers are outgaining them 6.5 to 6.1 average yards per gain. It's just the mistakes are completely different. Everything else, they have time of possessions. They both have the ball for almost 15 minutes. So they're actually very evenly matched right now. It's just New Haven has more mistakes, and they find themselves behind the game.
Yeah, every team is going to make mistakes, and every team is going to have lucky breaks in all sports at any level. The difference maker usually seems to be which team can take advantage of those lucky breaks and those mistakes. And Assumption so far has taken advantage of a couple of them. There was the mistake on the very first kickoff return where there was either a hold or a block in the back, and that got called back, and they forced the Chargers to punt on that drive. And then also there was the poor throw by Ronnie Nelson right in the red zone on the goal line, and it was right to the Assumption player, and he picked it off. So they took advantage of the opportunities they've been handed so far. The Chargers, however, are still in this, and they still have a good shot at keeping this under control like they have throughout the first half and then taking the lead. They just need to cut down on the mistakes and stop giving Assumption opportunities to take advantage of New Haven errors. We're going to take a quick break. The score at halftime, Chargers trailing 6-7 all the way up in Massachusetts to Assumption College. You're listening to the Charged Up Halftime Report. I'm Sean Malone alongside Joe Brown, Chris Schnabel, and Jonah Rosen. We'll be right back after this here on 88.7 WNHU West Haven.